years ago, I spent Christmas with my roommate because both of us were broke college kids sharing a tiny house in the suburbs just outside campus, and neither of our families were really big on holiday traditions anyway. We decided to stay for winter break and make the best of it. We put up a few cheap decorations, bought each other small gifts from the dollar section, and planned to watch movies all day before maybe going to a party that night. Christmas afternoon was quiet and easy. We opened our little presents, joked around, and by 5, my roommate said he wanted to head to that party near campus. I had planned on going too, but for some reason I felt drained and not in the mood to be social, so I told him to go ahead and have fun. He left around 6. I grabbed some snacks and zoned out watching TV for a bit. But by 8, a weird restlessness hit me. With everything closed, I figured I would take a walk and look at Christmas lights around the neighborhood. It was cold but not freezing, the kind of weather that wakes you up without hurting your face. I wandered through a few streets, then into a nearby park. A part of the path was covered in trees and felt separated from everything. As I walked past a bench in that darker stretch, I saw a man sitting alone. Something about the way he was hunched over made me feel a little sad for him. But when he lifted his head and looked at me, his expression was completely cold. No emotion at all. The look was so strange that it made the hair on my arms raise. I kept walking, a little faster this time, and tried not to look back, but the image of his face sat heavy in my mind. I reached the end of the path, turned around, and headed home. The whole walk back, I kept thinking about him and feeling that same uneasy pressure in my chest. When I reached my house, I slipped off my shoes and had just shut the door when a sudden thump hit from right outside. It startled me because it came almost immediately after I stepped inside. I leaned toward the peephole and felt my stomach drop. The man from the path was standing on my porch, staring straight at the door with that same blank, empty expression. I opened the door just a crack and asked if he was all right. He did not say a single word, just stared. I asked again if he needed help, but still nothing. A wave of unease went through me, so I shut the door quickly and checked the peephole again. He stayed there for a full minute before slowly moving to the side, out of view. That was when I realized the living room curtains were open and he could now see into my house. I froze. For some reason, I was afraid to walk up and close them because I did not want him to see me move. He probably could only see the couch and the Christmas tree from that angle, but it still felt awful knowing he was right there looking in. I stood completely still, trying to decide what to do, when a dull thud hit the window. I looked over just in time to see him slam a large rock against the glass, his face still blank and unreadable. The emptiness of his expression made my skin crawl. I sprinted into a bedroom, locked the door, and called 911 while hearing the man continue hitting the window. After a few more strikes, everything went silent. But then the pounding started again at the front door instead. The hits were heavy and steady, shaking the frame. It felt like it went on forever, even though it was probably only a couple of minutes. Then, finally, nothing. When the police arrived, the man was gone, like he had vanished into the night. The window had several cracks across it, and the front door had chunks of wood broken out, pieces scattered on the porch. The officers told me it was possibly an intoxicated person acting out with no real motive, but the way he stared and the way he followed me from the park made that hard to believe. Whatever his story was, the way he acted that night was deeply unsettling, and I still think about how close he came to getting inside. It was Christmas Eve, and if you had asked me that morning, I would have told you the day felt almost perfect because the snow was falling in soft, heavy flakes that made the city look peaceful without turning into slush right away. The office was decorated the same way it was every holiday season, with lights and garlands and stockings pinned to cubicles and everyone buzzing about family plans. I kept checking my phone because my sister had flown in the night before and my mom was already sending excited reminders that I was the last one missing. I promised her over and over that I would be home after my shift ended at 5. My coworker Aaron heard me and joked that my family was probably living inside a classic holiday movie at that very moment. We laughed and talked about our own chaotic traditions before she went back to her desk. The afternoon moved slowly until our annual gift exchange began. I expected the usual things like chocolate or a funny mug, and the first 2 gifts were exactly that, but the third caught my attention immediately. It was wrapped in plain brown paper without a bow or a name tag. Inside was a small velvet box, the kind you only see in romantic movies. Aaron watched me with wide eyes as I opened it. Sitting on the cushion was a delicate heart-shaped locket with a tiny diamond in the center and a small folded note. "Would you spend Christmas dinner with me?" The handwriting was neat and controlled. Too neat. Something felt strange about the way the message was written, as if the question was not an invitation, but an expectation. Aaron gasped and whispered that I had a secret admirer, but I tried to laugh it off even though a quiet, uneasy feeling crawled into my stomach. I looked around the office, but nobody looked like they were paying attention, and I told myself I was overthinking everything. Things got busy again, and by the time people started leaving for the night, I had mostly forgotten about the locket. Aaron waved a cheerful holiday goodbye and stepped out into the snow while I stayed behind to finish a few more tasks. The building was silent, too silent. Then the lights flickered twice and shut off completely. I muttered at the darkness and turned on my phone for light. The emergency system did not activate, which meant the front doors were locked and the elevators dead. My phone was at 5% and every instinct told me to save as much battery as possible. Then I heard footsteps, soft at first like someone dragging their feet. I froze and listened harder. They moved closer. "Hello," I called, trying to sound calm. A flashlight beam bounced across the hallway, and a man stepped into view. He introduced himself as Ryan and said he was new and had been on his way out when the building went dark. His voice seemed friendly enough, and for a moment I felt relief not being alone. We decided to check the basement to see if the breaker had tripped. The stairwell was cold and the air smelled like damp concrete. The deeper we went, the more uncomfortable I felt, but I kept moving. The basement lights flickered and faded, leaving us in the glow of his flashlight. He muttered about switches and wires while I checked my phone, now at 3%. It was clear the power was not coming back on. Ryan suggested grabbing candles from his desk, so we headed back upstairs. When we reached his workspace, I noticed how strange it looked for someone who claimed to be new. The desk was too organized. The mug looked used. Photos were pinned to the wall. A notebook lay open. When my eyes fell on the handwriting inside, my skin tightened because it matched the note from the locket. Every loop, every stroke, identical. "You liked the locket, did you not?" His voice came from right behind me and I jumped. He stared at me, not angry but focused in a way that made my stomach flip. I tried to sound casual as I said it was nice, but he stepped closer with a look that made my heart pound. "I knew you would," he said quietly, but there was no warmth in his expression, just something cold and intent. Panic crawled up my spine. I tried to step back toward the hallway, but he moved with me, blocking my path. "You do not understand," he said. "I have been waiting for this, waiting for you." The air felt heavy. I could hear my pulse in my ears. I knew then that the outage was not a coincidence. He planned everything. The next moments blurred together. Him reaching for something in the desk drawer. My hands shaking. The small glint of metal in the candlelight. My body reacting before my mind caught up. I shoved past him, sprinted to the stairs, and screamed for help as I pounded on the locked door. Someone from the security team finally heard me and opened it. By the time the police arrived, Ryan was gone, vanished into the snow. They searched the office and found only his notebook, filled page after page with my name, my schedule, my habits, details I never shared with anyone. I did not go home that night. I could not bring myself to walk into the dark alone. And even now, Christmas does not feel the same. Not after learning that sometimes the scariest stories do not come from the woods or the open road. Sometimes they come from the people standing right beside you, smiling in the glow of holiday lights. I work part-time at a gas station on the edge of my city near the suburbs, and honestly, it is just a very normal place. Nothing creepy or isolated about it at all. I only picked it because rent was going up, and my main job was no longer enough to cover everything. The overnight shift was the only one that fit with my schedule, and gas stations were one of the few places hiring those hours. This happened about 10 months ago. It was cold that night with a layer of old snow still on the ground after a heavy storm earlier in the week. Other than that, it felt like a typical overnight. Being in the suburbs meant there was barely any traffic, just a few cars every now and then, and by midnight only a handful of people had come in. I got bored and stepped away from the counter to tidy the shelves, and just a couple minutes later I heard the door chime. I turned around and saw a man walk straight toward the front desk. He leaned over the counter and looked around like he was checking to see if anyone was nearby. I headed back and asked if he needed help. He turned to look at me with this startled expression, hesitated, then said he was fine before walking back out. Something about the way he moved made my stomach tighten. I work at a gas station overnight, so the thought of someone planning to take advantage of the quiet was always in the back of my mind. I watched him walk out to a car parked in a strange spot, close to the pumps but not actually in a parking space. He got in and drove off. I had no way to prove he was planning something, but the way he acted made every instinct in me go on alert. I figured maybe surprising him by being right behind him when he walked in threw him off. After thinking it over for a couple of minutes, I became convinced it had been a possible attempt to check the place out, so I called the police to report what happened, just in case he was going to try another gas station. They said an officer would stop by soon to take a statement. I hung up and kept watching the empty lot. Not even a minute later, the same car pulled back in. They parked in the exact same strange spot and just sat there with the engine running. From where I stood, I could see movement in both front seats, which meant there were at least 2 people inside. My heart dropped. I quickly locked the front doors and braced myself. The car stayed there like they were waiting for the right moment. Thankfully, the officer pulled into the lot soon after and recognized the car immediately. He parked behind them, blocking them in. What happened next felt unreal. There was no dramatic struggle. The officer walked up, opened the door, and pulled 2 men out. One of them was the guy who had come inside earlier. They tried to act confused, like they were not doing anything wrong, but the officer clearly did not buy it. When they checked the trunk, things took a darker turn. Inside, there were several dangerous items, including weapons, rope, tape, and other supplies that pointed toward something far more serious than a simple robbery. Both men were arrested and taken in. Even though the situation ended safely, I still feel shaken every time I think about what might have happened. If I had ignored that first strange moment, if I had not called the police when I did, I might have faced something much worse than losing money, and there is a real chance I would not have been seen after that night. Last New Year's, my 2 best friends and I decided it would be fun to rent a house for the night. Nothing wild, just a quiet hangout for our small group since all of us lived in cramped dorm rooms. and the idea of having an entire place to ourselves felt like a luxury. Jason rented an Airbnb on the outskirts of town, more of a wooden cabin than a regular house, with similar cabins scattered around but spaced far enough apart that it felt like we were mostly alone out there. The inside was not impressive, but none of us cared. We spent the day talking in the living room, just relaxing and enjoying the calm. Around 6 in the evening, Christian drove to the store to grab snacks and drinks, leaving Jason and me on the couch, when a sudden knock at the door broke the quiet. We looked at each other, confused, because nobody should have been out there, and the idea of someone knocking on the door of an Airbnb in the woods felt odd. I walked to the peephole and saw a man standing there. The cabin door had a metal latch, so I flipped it over and cracked the door open. I honestly thought maybe he was the owner or someone connected to the rental. Instead, he glared at me with this tense, irritated expression and told us, in a sharp and disrespectful tone, that we needed to keep it quiet tonight and not disturb the entire neighborhood. His voice had this pushy edge to it, almost like he was accusing us of already making noise, even though we had done nothing loud and the cabins were spaced so far apart you would need fireworks to hear anything. I was not in the mood to argue, so I said sure and shut the door, but he immediately banged on it again. Jason and I exchanged a look like this guy was seriously unbalanced. After a moment, we heard him walk away. Christian came back and almost did not believe us when we told him what happened. We shrugged it off and went back to watching a movie and playing games on Jason's Switch. Hours passed fast, and right before midnight a loud noise came from outside, like something heavy hitting the ground. A few seconds later, the sharp sound of glass breaking echoed right outside the door. All of us rushed to the window, and a cold wave hit my stomach when I saw the same man standing next to Christian's car, the windshield shattered and glass everywhere. He was gripping a metal baseball bat and pacing around in this frantic, unhinged way that made the hair on my arm stand up. Christian was furious and ran for the door, ready to confront him, and Jason and I bolted after him to stop him, but before we even reached the doorway, a deafening crack split the air. A gunshot. I froze, convinced the worst had happened, but then Christian sprinted back inside faster than I had ever seen him move and slammed the lock. More shots followed, hitting the side of the cabin, and then the man started hitting the door with the bat, each impact shaking the frame. Just as suddenly as it started, the noise stopped. The man ran off into the darkness and disappeared. When the police investigated later, they discovered he was not even a neighbor, had no connection to the Airbnb, and there was no record of him living anywhere nearby. Nobody could explain who he was or why he acted like that on New Year's Eve. All we knew was that we had been seconds away from something that could have changed our lives forever, and the thought of how random it all was still makes me uneasy whenever I think about that night. This happened in 2018 after I had moved into a small house far from my hometown, still getting used to the quiet, the distance, and the sense of starting over. I barely knew anyone in the area, and since I worked from home most days, I often went a full week without speaking to another person face to face. That is probably why the idea of spending my first Christmas alone felt a little heavier than I expected. My family lived too far away, and I did not have enough vacation days to travel, so Christmas was going to be just another day for me. On Christmas Eve, I stayed up late working, trying to get ahead so I could relax the next morning. I had music in my earbuds and the house was calm, but even through the sound, I suddenly heard something outside, a faint noise just clear enough to cut through the music. I pulled out one earbud and listened. Nothing. At first, I thought maybe I imagined it, but something in me wanted to double check. I walked to the back window and looked out into the dark yard but saw nothing. Then I moved to the front and again saw only falling snow. When I opened the door to check the porch, my stomach tightened. A set of shoe prints in the snow led right up to my doorstep, and then walked back out to the driveway. No package, no mail, nothing left behind, just footprints. I felt uneasy but tried to brush it off, locked the door, and went back to work. I eventually went to bed, telling myself it was probably nothing. Waking up on Christmas morning felt strange, since it did not feel like Christmas at all. I made coffee, turned on the TV, and let the morning pass quietly. I called my parents, talked for a bit, and then spent the day inside because the wind was freezing and the world outside felt empty. By 6 in the evening, I had done practically nothing, made dinner, and planned to sleep early. That is when I heard it again. A slow shuffling in the snow, footsteps moving toward my front door. I held still, my heart thumping in that slow, heavy way that makes you aware of every breath. After a second, the footsteps moved away again. When I opened the door, I saw another set of prints almost exactly like the night before. That was when I decided to stay up late. I forced myself to keep the lights on and fight the tiredness until around 10. But I must have drifted off on the couch because the next thing I remembered was waking up to the glow of the TV still playing in the dark room. I paused it and stood up, planning to walk to my bedroom, but the second I stepped into the hallway, everything in me froze. My bedroom door was open. I always kept it closed. A chill ran through me as I walked over and slowly pushed it wider. When I flicked on the light, I felt my stomach drop. Wet shoe prints, clear and heavy, were scattered across the floor leading to and from the window. I spun around and turned on the hallway light, now seeing a trail of prints going toward the living room. I followed them until they stopped right outside the room where I had been sleeping, like whoever it was had stepped forward, seen me, and turned around instantly. The prints led nowhere else. No drawers opened, nothing taken, nothing disturbed, except for the fact that a stranger had been inside my house while I was asleep. When the police came, they tried to help, but the truth is there was not much they could do. Their best guess was that the person had come by the previous 2 nights checking if I was home, and after I did not answer the door, they must have assumed I was gone for the holiday. Maybe they only intended to steal something. Maybe that is all it was. But the thought that someone was inside my home while I lay sleeping in the next room still sits with me to this day. Whoever they were, they never came back, but Christmas has never felt quite the same since. This happened last January when I took a week off work right after New Year's, hoping everyone else would be back at their jobs so I could enjoy some quiet time. My plan was simple: shop a little, drive around in the snow, and just relax alone in my apartment. That day I spent the afternoon going from store to store, then got home around 6 and dropped onto the couch with the snacks I bought. I turned on the TV and started dozing off a bit after such a long, cold day. Around 7:30, the PA system buzzed, the loud static crackle that meant someone was downstairs wanting me to let them into the building. I was not expecting anyone and had no idea who it could be. They buzzed again. I walked to the window and lifted the blinds just enough to peek out. A large man stood at the front door. The snow and dim light made everything look muted, but I could tell he was older, maybe mid-40s, and I had never seen him before. Only 3 other people lived in the building at that time, and I knew all of them. He was not one of them. I figured if he belonged there or was visiting someone, they would let him in, so I muted the buzzer and went back to the couch. I stopped thinking about it and drifted in and out of sleep until around 10, when I finally turned the TV off and went to bed. I fell asleep the moment my head hit the pillow. A few hours later, I shot awake to a loud thud from just outside my room. It was so sudden and so heavy sounding that for a second I could not even process it. My heart was pounding as I stared at my bedroom door waiting for another sound. Nothing. The silence was thick, like the whole building was holding its breath. I walked to the door and pressed my ear against it. Still nothing, besides the faint creaks of the old walls. I slowly opened it and looked into the living room. Everything was dark and still, but something felt off. I kept the lights off and moved as quietly as I could toward the hallway. When I reached the front hall, I froze. My apartment door was wide open. The cold air from the stairwell slipped across the floor, and my whole body tensed. I stepped back, trying not to make a sound, and as I turned to go back to my room, I noticed a huge dent in the wood next to the knob. It looked like someone had hit it with real force. Panic surged through me. I rushed into my room, locked the door, ran into the closet, and called 911. I was sure the intruder was still inside and would try my door again. But the apartment stayed silent. When the police arrived, they searched every corner and found nothing. They told me they believed the intruder had probably buzzed all the apartments until one of my neighbors let him in out of kindness. Once he got inside the stairwell, nobody knows why he picked my door or why he hit it once and then stopped. The dent looked more like a moment of frustration than a real attempt to break in. It still chills me to think he was just feet away from where I slept. I still live in that same apartment, and nothing else has happened. But every time the PA system buzzes, I get that same uneasy feeling, wondering who it was that night and what they wanted. Last year, my roommate moved out of the house. We had been renting together for 3 years. And even though we both had better jobs by then and could finally afford nicer places, I chose to stay behind a little longer. The house was not great, but it was familiar, and after he left, I suddenly had all this extra space that made it feel strangely new again. This happened in early December during a rough week of snowstorms. My office told us we could work from home if we wanted, and I took the offer without thinking twice. I set up in my old roommate's room and spent most of the day working until I heard a knock at the front door. When I checked, a man in a heavy winter jacket stood on my porch. He did not look like a delivery driver or a neighbor, just a regular guy with snow clinging to his sleeves. I opened the door a little, feeling the cold rush in, and asked how I could help him. He gave me a polite smile and apologized for bothering me, then said his car had slid into the snowbank near my house and he did not have a phone on him. He asked if he could borrow mine. Even though something felt off, I told him to wait and closed the door so I could check for myself. When I looked out the window, I did see a small SUV stuck at an angle in the snow, so I grabbed a jacket and went outside. I let him use my phone while I stayed on the porch with him just in case. After a quick call to his brother, he thanked me, handed back my phone, and walked off toward the car. I watched him get inside before going back upstairs to finish my work. A few hours passed, and around 7 I wrapped up for the day. Then I remembered the guy out front and checked the window. His car was still there, and he was still sitting inside, shifting around like he was waiting for something. 3 hours had gone by, and while it felt strange, I told myself his brother was probably on the way. I made dinner, watched some TV, and tried to ignore how unsettled the whole thing made me. Around 9:30, I went upstairs to shower before bed. A few minutes into the shower, the calm of the house shattered. Something or someone began pounding on my front door so hard it made the walls shake. It was fast, loud, desperate, like the person on the other side was losing control. I froze for a second, my heart racing, the sound echoing all the way upstairs. I shut off the water, dried off as fast as I could, threw on clothes, and stepped into the hallway. Then everything went silent, completely silent. The kind of silence that makes every hair on your arm stand straight up. I walked downstairs slowly, feeling like something was standing just out of sight. When I finally reached the front door and looked through the window, the porch was empty. I hurried to another window to check the road. The SUV was still there, but the man was gone. Something in my chest tightened as I grabbed my phone and called the police. When they arrived, They checked around the house and found several sets of footprints in the snow, though most of them had already been softened by the storm. They ran the license plate of the SUV, matched it to a photo, and told me it looked like the same man I had helped earlier. They waited for him to turn up over the next few days, but he never did. Nobody ever came to claim the car, nobody called to report anything, and nothing new was ever found. To this day, the part that gets me is not knowing who was at my door that night or why they were trying so hard to get in. Some people think the man was running from someone and trying to get help. Others believe someone else was out there, using the bad weather to their advantage. But the truth is, nobody knows. The questions about that night only get heavier with time, and none of them have answers. It was a snowy night when I pulled into the parking lot of the gas station. I worked the overnight 11 to 7 shift, and I had already been there for a few months before this happened. I never liked the job, not even a little, but finding a new one was tough for me at the time, and night shifts fit my schedule best. Still, every night I went in exhausted and pushed myself through the long hours. I parked in front of the building beside my coworker's car, the only other vehicle out there, then headed inside to take over his shift. He grabbed his jacket, nodded goodbye, and left a couple minutes later. After that, it was just me in the quiet building with the snow hitting the windows. My manager had left a paper on the counter with a few tasks, but it was nothing serious. Maybe an hour of work total. I usually saved those tasks for later to keep myself awake when the tiredness kicked in. Around midnight, I glanced up from my phone when I saw headlights pulling into the station. An old SUV rolled up to one of the pumps. With the snow coming down hard, it was rare to see customers, but not impossible. I went back to scrolling through my phone, not thinking much of it, until almost 10 minutes passed. When I looked again, the SUV was still there. The headlights were off. No movement, no doors opening, no sign of anyone getting gas. It looked like the car had been abandoned. I stood up and stepped closer to the window, trying to see through the dark. If someone was still inside with the engine off, they would be freezing. The wind was strong, the snow thick, and even I felt the cold through the glass. I watched another minute, staring into the unlit windows, waiting for any sign of life, but nothing changed. Eventually, my concern outweighed my hesitation. I put on my jacket and stepped outside into the biting cold. The temperature hit me instantly. I hurried to the SUV and tapped on the glass. No response. I cupped my hands around my eyes and leaned in. From what I could see, the seats were empty, but the darkness made it hard to be certain. I called out, asking if anyone needed help, but silence answered me. Confused and freezing, I backed away and turned toward the station. That was when I noticed something I had missed earlier: shoe prints in the snow. A straight line leading from the SUV toward the side of the building. Not toward the front door, but toward the darker side, where no lights faced. A chill ran through me, sharper than the cold. I headed inside quickly, locked the door, and leaned over the small heater beside the counter. I had barely warmed my hands for 30 seconds when a heavy thump echoed from the back room, a deep, sharp sound that felt out of place in the quiet night. I spun around, heart pounding. The store was empty. There should have been no one back there. Slowly, I walked around the counter, following small puddles of melted, dirty snow on the floor. Someone had walked through the store. I turned the corner toward the supply room, and that was when I saw him. A tall figure stood in the dark behind one of the metal shelves. Broad shoulders, a messy beard. Eyes fixed right on me. I froze so hard I barely breathed. For a second, neither of us moved. I could not make sense of it. How he got inside. Why he was standing there. What he wanted. My instincts finally kicked in, and instead of confronting him, I backed away slowly, step by step, until I reached the counter. I picked up the store phone and whispered for help, barely able to keep my voice steady. The next 10 minutes felt unreal. I kept staring toward the back, waiting for him to step out, to move, to say something, but he never did. The store was silent, too silent. When the police finally pulled into the parking lot, I went to unlock the door and told them exactly where he was. They went straight to the supply room while I stayed near the exit. I expected shouting, maybe a struggle, but instead there was nothing. The officers came back with worried looks and told me the room was empty. I hurried back with them, uneasy, but they were right. He was gone. The only trace left was a cluster of wet shoe prints near the back exit. Outside, fresh tracks in the snow moved straight from that door into the huge open field behind the station. A field that stretched on for miles, completely dark, no houses, no roads, nothing. The officers searched the area the next few days, but with the cold and wind, they found nothing. The SUV was towed for investigation, but somehow there was no record of its ownership and no clear information on who it belonged to. And that left us with only the questions from that night: who the man was, why he came inside, where he went in that frozen dark field, and why he never came back. I have been a police officer in my county for almost 10 years, and in that time I have seen things that made me question why I ever chose this career, but nothing has stayed with me the way this one Christmas case did. It was late winter, the kind of night where the cold sits heavy in the air and the wind feels like it can cut right through you. My shift that night was simple highway patrol, usually the most boring part of the job. On a normal night, I might pull over a couple of drivers for speeding and then spend the rest of the shift drinking lukewarm coffee and listening to the radio. But sometime around 2 in the morning, I drove past an old car parked far off on the shoulder. Its lights were off, and it was deep enough into the dark that I barely saw it until I had already passed. I took the next exit, looped back around, and returned about 15 minutes later. I figured it was just a broken down car that I had somehow missed earlier. Nothing urgent. I parked about 15 feet behind it, kept my headlights pointed toward the back bumper, and called in to report an abandoned vehicle check. When I walked up to it with my flashlight, the first thing I noticed was how old the car looked, rusted and dented like it had lived through a lifetime of bad weather. The windows were cloudy. I shined my light inside and immediately felt uneasy. The back seat was covered in women's clothing, but not in a normal way. They were scattered, crumpled, tossed around like someone had been searching through them or pulling them off in a hurry. I stepped around to the passenger side when a sound behind me made my blood run cold. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. Coming from the tree line just beyond the guardrail. When I spun around and pointed my light into the woods, the footsteps stopped instantly. The trees stood still, heavy with frost, silent in a way that felt wrong. I yelled out for whoever was there to step forward with their hands up. Nothing, not even the sound of breathing. My heart was pounding hard enough that I could hear it in my ears as I called for backup. Waiting in that cold silence felt like an hour, even though it was only minutes. I kept my firearm in hand and moved behind the car, trying to stay covered while keeping my eyes on the woods. Every second stretched. I felt watched. Not just watched, studied, like whoever was out there was deciding their next move. When the backup unit finally arrived, the sound of their tires on the asphalt was the biggest relief I have felt in years. And right as their headlights hit the trees, I heard fast footsteps tearing deeper into the woods. Someone had been standing there the entire time. We searched the car first because going into the woods blind was too risky. Inside, we found things that made the situation even worse. More scattered clothes, signs of a struggle, and an empty ammo package. Whoever had been hiding in the woods may have had a weapon on them. Knowing that someone armed had been watching me in the dark while I stood exposed on the highway made my stomach twist. The next day, we did a full investigation. The car was untraceable. The prints in the snow disappeared only a short way into the woods. No missing person connected to the clothing. No registrations. No plates tied to anything. Nothing we could even begin to build a suspect or victim profile around. It became another open case, with no answers. But I still think about that night, about those slow footsteps behind me, about the feeling of being watched from the dark, and especially about how close that person must have been. Quiet enough to hide, patient enough to wait, and gone before we ever had a chance to stop them. I do deliveries for my local Papa John's to help cover college expenses, and during December I always pick up extra shifts before Christmas because the money is better, even though the nights get long and the roads get dangerous when the snow starts piling up. A few of my friends work there too, but since we are all delivery drivers, we barely see each other once the rush hits. This happened last December on a night when the snow was coming down steady and thick, the kind that covers your windshield faster than the wipers can handle and makes every street feel like a tunnel. By 9:30, I grabbed my next 2 orders and got in my car, planning the route and groaning when I saw how far they were. 15 minutes from the shop in normal conditions, which meant about 25 minutes in this weather. The first half of the drive was fine, but the GPS eventually pushed me toward the older part of town, the section people rarely visit anymore unless they live there, because most of the stores have closed and the houses look worn down and half forgotten. After around 20 minutes, I pulled into the neighborhood for the first order, noticing how empty the streets were. No cars parked along the curbs, no lights on in most of the windows, just snow collecting on roofs and porches. I reached the house, walked up to the door, and a kind older man answered, paid quickly, and thanked me for driving out in the bad weather. That was the last moment I would feel calm that night. I got back in my car and set the directions for the second order. It was deeper into the neighborhood, so far out that houses were suddenly spaced apart with long gaps of trees and dark fields between them. When I reached the address, I could not see any other homes around, just tall trees shaking snow off their branches. I parked on the street, grabbed the pizzas, and walked up to the front door. I knocked and waited in the freezing air. Eventually, the door opened, and a middle-aged woman appeared, looking like she had just woken up. Her hair was messy, her eyes tired and flat, and something about her expression made me uncomfortable, though I could not say why. I told her the total, and she took the pizzas to a small table and asked me to wait while she got cash. A minute later, she came back slowly, counting bills in this strange, distracted way, pausing, recounting, mumbling to herself. Then she started making small talk about my night and the snow, her tone weirdly calm even though she was struggling to add the money. It felt like she was stalling. I glanced back at my car for a second just to break the awkwardness, and my stomach dropped. A man was standing right next to my car, peering into the windows, messing with the door handle like he was trying to break in. When I turned back to the woman, her entire face had changed. There was this hard, angry look, like I had ruined whatever plan she had. She grabbed my arm and yelled something toward the man near my car. He spun around and started running toward us fast. Panic hit me all at once. She tried to pull me inside the house, but I ripped my arm free and shoved her back just enough to slip away. Instinct took over, and I sprinted straight into the trees behind the house. I could hear the man chasing me, his footsteps heavy in the snow, each one close enough to push my fear higher. I ran until my lungs burned, and finally the footsteps faded. The moonlight was strong enough through the trees that I could find my way back toward a street. I kept running until I reached an open road with better reception and called 911. 10 minutes later, a patrol car picked me up while another unit went to the house. They found the man outside trying to break into my car again, like he thought he still had time before anyone returned. The officers told me later that the couple had likely run out of money and decided to target anyone who looked alone on a quiet night. The woman stalled me so the man could rob my car without me knowing, but since I caught them in the act, nobody knows what their next move would have been. I try not to think about that part too much. I am just grateful I reacted fast enough to escape and that I was the one who reported them before they had the chance to try something worse with someone else. I was renting a tiny winter cabin that January. The kind of bare-bones place meant only for people who came out to the frozen lake to fish. It was nothing fancy at all, just a bed, a fireplace, and enough space to stay warm between long hours on the ice. I usually brought a friend on trips like this, but this time I went alone, something I had done plenty of times without any issues. I planned to stay 3 days with no schedule except relaxing and ice fishing. On the first afternoon, I unpacked, brewed a cup of hot coffee, and stretched out by the fireplace while the snow tapped softly against the window. I fell asleep early and woke up around 7, ready to head to the lake. It was a 10-minute walk down a quiet snow-covered path, surrounded by bare winter trees. When I reached the lake, I picked my spot, drilled through the ice, and settled in. The cold air was sharp, but the silence felt peaceful in a way that made the whole world slow down. I stayed out there 3 or 4 hours until the snow picked up and the wind started cutting across the ice. I decided to call it for the day and walked back toward the path, but as soon as I stepped onto it, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. There were fresh footprints in the snow next to mine. Footprints that had not been there earlier. They went all the way up to the exact spot where I had been sitting on the lake, then turned around and followed the path back toward the cabin. It looked like someone else had been out there, someone who came right up behind me and stood close enough to watch me without saying a word. I followed the footprints, my pulse picking up with every step. They went straight down the path, but then suddenly veered off into the woods, leading deeper between the trees, until they disappeared into the distance. That made me even more uneasy because there was nothing around for miles, no other cabins, no trails, nothing that would explain why someone would be wandering out here alone in the middle of winter. I went back inside and warmed my hands by the fire, though my mind kept circling back to those prints. As the sun went down, the cabin felt smaller and the silence outside felt heavier. I tried reading, tried focusing on anything else, but about an hour after sunset I heard it. Soft crunching in the snow outside, slow and steady, like someone walking. I moved to the window and peeked out just enough to see a figure near the trees. They were bundled up head to toe, almost impossible to make out, but I could see them moving toward the path. Then they turned and started walking straight toward the cabin. I dropped below the window, my heart pounding so loudly I felt it in my throat. The footsteps came right up to the wall, then shifted to the side, stopping directly under the window where I was hiding. Their shadows slid across the curtain like they were leaning in to look inside. I tilted my head the tiniest bit upward and saw a pair of eyes staring directly at me from just inches away through the glass. I stumbled back in shock as the person immediately tried to pull the window open. I rushed to grab the closest thing I could use to defend myself, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The window rattled again, harder this time, and I could hear the person breathing on the other side of the glass. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The figure turned and ran into the woods, disappearing into the blowing snow as quickly as they had appeared. That was all it took. I grabbed my bag, threw everything into my car, and drove out of that cabin as fast as the icy road allowed. I do not know who that person was or what they wanted, but they had followed my tracks from the lake, watched me long enough to know I was alone, and came back after dark to try and get inside. I got away without harm, but to this day I still think about how close that night came to ending very differently. The snow had started falling a few days before Christmas, thick and soft, covering everything in a clean white blanket, but that night, the calm winter scene shifted into something I will never forget. I was 26 at the time, working as a nurse in training, constantly tired but holding myself together with pure determination. A few days earlier, I had passed a major exam and felt like I finally deserved a break, maybe even a small adventure. My boyfriend Michael had invited me to spend Christmas with his family, and I fully intended to go, but before that, I wanted to visit my childhood best friend Ellie. We had not seen each other in forever, and with the holidays coming, something in my chest kept tugging me toward her. Michael was not thrilled when I mentioned the plan. He kept saying the weather was rough and it was too late to drive, but I laughed it off and told him I would be fine. The first part of the drive was peaceful enough. Houses were lined with Christmas lights, the radio was playing non-stop carols, and I was singing along without a care. But the farther I drove, the fewer lights I saw. The road narrowed and twisted, tall trees casting long shadows as the GPS started lagging at the worst possible moment. I came across two snow-covered signs pointing in different directions and made a quick guess. I soon realized I had chosen wrong because the road grew darker and tighter, the trees pressing in like they wanted to swallow my car whole. The music cut out and turned into static. I tried refreshing the GPS, but it refused to load. I kept telling myself it was just a small detour, nothing serious. Then I saw him, a tall figure standing by the side of the road wearing a red coat and a Santa hat. He stood perfectly still, facing the road. I slowed down, unsure if he needed help, but he did not wave or move. His stillness made my stomach twist. I pressed the gas and kept going. A few miles later, I saw him again under a flickering street lamp. This time he turned his head slowly as I passed, his eyes following my car in a way that made my skin crawl. My pulse pounded and my fingers tightened on the wheel. I checked the rearview mirror and saw something even worse. Headlights. A rusted old pickup truck had pulled up behind me out of nowhere. At first I thought it was another driver, but then it started tailgating me, its high beams blinding. I tapped the brake gently to signal for space, but the truck stayed glued to me. It even swerved closer. My heart dropped when I glanced over and saw the driver pull up beside me. He had a scruffy beard and a wide grin that felt all wrong. He was also wearing a Santa hat. He suddenly swerved toward me, pushing me toward the icy edge of the road. I fought to keep control as the tires slid on the snow. Adrenaline took over. I slammed the gas and tried to outrun him, my car shaking as it strained forward. After what felt like an hour but was probably a minute, I saw a faint warm light through the trees. A cabin. Without thinking, I veered into the driveway, skidding to a stop. I jumped out, ran to the door, and pounded with both fists. "Someone please help me." The door opened slowly. An older woman stood there with silver hair and kind eyes, wearing a cozy cardigan, the exact image of a holiday grandmother. She let me in and locked the door behind me. The cabin smelled like cinnamon and pine. A small Christmas tree glowed in the corner, and for a split second, I felt safe. Then I heard it, tires crunching on snow. I looked out the window. The truck was there. The driver stepped out, his Santa hat crooked, his steps slow and steady as he came toward the cabin. "Do not worry, dear," the woman said in a calm voice that suddenly felt too calm. She picked up a fire poker and held it with steady hands. "He will not bother us for long." Her tone sent a wave of nerves through me. Before I could ask anything, the man banged on the door, shouting words I could not understand. The woman motioned for silence. Then everything erupted at once. The man smashed a window. Glass scattered across the floor. The woman charged with the poker, yelling with surprising strength. I grabbed a heavy candlestick and backed away, my mind spinning. I barely remember how I escaped the chaos. Somehow I made it to my car. Somehow I found the main road again. By the time I reached Ellie's house, the sun was rising, and I was shaking so hard I could barely breathe. When I tried telling the police what happened, they looked at me with polite disbelief. They said there was no cabin in that area, no reports of a man or a truck, only my tire tracks leading off the road. I still do not know what I drove into that night. All I know is that I have never taken a rural road after dark again, and every time I see a Santa hat, my stomach tightens. Christmas is supposed to be a season of joy, but for me, it will always carry the shadow of that quiet, snowy night when everything stopped feeling safe. It was early January, and I was spending my day off inside with the fireplace going, trying to stay warm because the cold outside felt sharp enough to bite through every layer you owned. I had done a few chores around the house and kept the news running in the background as they warned everyone about high winds and a possible blizzard rolling in that night. By 5 in the evening, I could already hear the wind building strength, hitting the house in long, loud bursts. I switched the channel and tried to relax on the couch, but by 7, the gusts were shaking the walls hard enough to make me sit up. I walked to the back window to see how bad it really was, expecting nothing more than swirling snow, but the second I looked out, my stomach tightened. Through the fading visibility, I saw a lone figure walking across my backyard. My yard was big and open, no fence at all, but even then, it did not make sense. With the weather getting violent, no one should have been out there strolling like it was a normal night. The person walked at a steady pace toward the far end of the yard, heading in the direction of a long, isolated road that stretched for miles without anything nearby. Within a few seconds, the snow swallowed them, leaving nothing but white and darkness. I stood there longer than I meant to, hoping to see them again, wondering what they were doing and if they were okay, but the storm hid everything. I went back to the TV, but I could not stop thinking about it. Only 5 minutes later, there was a knock at my front door, sharp enough to make me jump. I walked over carefully and cracked it open. A man in a heavy winter jacket stood there, snow stuck to his shoulders, nose bright red, face pale in a way that made it clear he had been out in the cold far too long. I could not know for sure if he was the same figure I saw, but everything in me told me it probably was. I asked how I could help, and he gave this small forced smile through chattering teeth. He said he was waiting for a ride and asked if he could step inside for a few minutes, just long enough to warm up. I froze. My first instinct was to say absolutely not, because letting a stranger into your home at night during a storm never feels smart, but seeing him shaking on my doorstep made it hard. When someone looks like they are struggling to stay standing, refusing them feels wrong. I offered a compromise. I told him he could wait on the porch where the overhang kept the snow off, and that I would bring him an old jacket to help with the cold. He did not look thrilled with that answer, but he gave a slow nod and stepped to the side, sitting on the chair near the door. I closed and locked the door, then headed upstairs to grab the old jacket. It was beat up and far too big for me, something I never wore anymore, but anything was better than nothing. I picked it up and went back downstairs, ready to unlock the door again. But something made me stop. A small, quiet instinct made me hesitate. I leaned toward the peephole and looked through it. My breath caught immediately. The man was no longer sitting on the chair. He was standing right up against the door, his hand wrapped around the handle, positioned like he was waiting for me to unlock it so he could push his way inside the second the lock clicked. A cold rush went through me. I stepped back slowly, heart pounding, and quietly pulled out my phone to call for help. When the dispatcher answered, I whispered everything as softly as I could, never taking my eyes off the door because I knew he was only inches away on the other side. Once they said officers were on their way, I moved closer to the peephole again, careful and silent. The porch was empty. The man was gone, not walking down the driveway, not crossing the street, not hiding near the yard. He vanished into the storm as if he knew I had made the call. The police searched around the property but found nothing. Not a set of footprints. Not a sign he had ever been there, at all. To this day, I have no idea what he wanted or what would have happened if I had opened the door that night. All I know is that I still double-check the locks every time the wind starts to howl, and I hope I never see a figure walking through my yard again.